Hello and welcome everyone. This is a do-over of the last video. Hopefully you can all hear me now. So, before I start, I want to point out I'm going to use absolutely zero Ragnarok Online Assets or footage in this video, sparing just one screenshot from 2002, which is my first screenshot that I still have in keeping. I don't want them to accidentally DMCA me thinking this is a private server video, because it is not. You can enjoy my fan art in the background though. So, if you don't know me, I am Zelly. I started the game way back in 2001, or maybe it was 2002. You know what? I'm not entirely sure. But my screenshots in 2002 and I definitely played before then. I played on the official servers all the way up until 2018. I used to help run events, assisted players on the forums, I wrote quests, I worked on fan sites, I was continually putting out content for YouTube and later on Twitch. I was also a guild leader and a community representative for many of the players. If you're not familiar with Ragnarok Online, it's a Korean MMORPG developed in the early 2000s. It had a long period of both open and closed beta testing before it finally went pay to play in June 2003. However, despite being a much beloved game, its early development was plagued with issues. Most notably, the original development team and creators left after an internal dispute, and this left Gravity with a game that they were never able to finish. Ragnarok Online was destined to be in beta forever. Despite this, the world and the classes continued to be expanded, and the population of Ragnarok Online exceeded over 40 million players. And Gravity love to boast about this on their websites. Ragnarok is heavily based on Dungeons & Dragons, the spell names, the classes, and the stat system. By the way, Fireball sucks in Ragnarok, but that's another rant altogether. In Korea, Ragnarok was marketed as a romantic RPG, putting in systems in place such as marriage and families. The gameplay content was very basic and somewhat lacking, so many players were enveloped in a more roleplay type scenario than actually playing the game. It's also inclusive of many psychologically addictive gameplay mechanisms. Almost everything is RNG based. The item drops, the weapon and armor upgrades, all wrapped up in this cute little anime-esque skin with catchy BGMs, rewarding sound effects when you level up, and somewhat adorable enemy monsters. I don't need to go in depth on the addiction side of things. There are many content creators out there that have covered this immensely. Jim Sterling comes to mind. If you want a very basic understanding of the psychology behind why such a simple game is so addictive, look up Skinner's Box and Pavlov's Dog. For those who have played this game, this is why low-level mobs drop more items than higher-level ones. They are conditioning you to want to kill things later on. Some companies even employ behavioural psychologists to make sure the games they produce are as addictive as possible. Now, while I can't be sure that Gravity do that, I can be sure they follow research in the field or simply just copy other games. And if that's a lot to take in, just consider every monster kill, every upgrade, every socket enchant, every loot box a form of gambling. And then throw in a good dose of socialising. In short, the game is very addictive and it's designed to be. So over the years, Ragnarok has changed direction somewhat, undergoing a complete overhaul of game mechanics, partly to facilitate future development as the original devs who left took much of the source code with them, and also to change direction to match modern markets, moving from a subscription-based model to a cash shop and microtransaction-based model. And it's proved extremely controversial with the player base. As Ragnarok aged, they attempted a successor, Ragnarok 2. They tried this 2 or maybe 3 times. It flopped every time, and it was eventually mothballed and left in an archive state for only the North American players to access. With the success of microtransactions, loot boxes, gacha, and all those things that gamers come to hate, came the mobile gaming spin-offs. At this time, when I did the research for this, I googled and I found at least 8 various mobile games, but I know there are more out there. Keep looking, they're just going to keep pumping these out. This leaves the old PC gamers frustrated and furious. The lack of development on the PC game and the change of direction of what was a grindy role-playing atmosphere. It seems that the mobile games have taken precedent over the PC platform, and as to be expected, it makes at least 20 times the revenue. Go look it up. Gravity's business model seems to be one of selling the rights to use their IP now. There are all sorts of clicker games out there, all skinned up with Ragnarok skins, and they also sell licenses to host the PC version regionally. And such a move makes sense. There's less work for them, they only need to develop the game once, they don't need to employ as many staff, and they keep the money rolling in. Great scam. So early Ragnarok Online was plagued by a combination of hackings and poor security. It wasn't long before players who were disgruntled with a slow update schedule or the move to pay to play from open beta were able to get hold of server files one way or another. Most notably, a large hacking event happened in August 2003, shortly after pay to play started. Player accounts were compromised, items were created, GM accounts were accessed and made some weird announcements in game, and shortly after that, the first private server started to crop up. If you played back then, that was the hacking event that led to the Spotted Sunglasses quest for compensation. Despite the presence of private servers from such an early age in the game's life, more and more server files were obtained by people who didn't agree with developments on the official servers. Some were obtained by hacking, and that continues to this very day, and others were sold by people who worked there. And this holds true for most regions of the game, but most noticeably the international version hosted in the United States. And this allowed the development of emulators rather than running stolen files from the official game. What is interesting is that the use of private servers was never a secret. Many official players would speak openly about it, in front of or even directly to the staff, such as practicing for tournaments. RWC is a tournament where each region would send a team to compete against each other region, and they would compete originally in Korea, but then they changed it to switch to the previous winner's location. And each region would have a series of tournaments to decide who they would send. And the teams involved would often talk to the staff about how they'd been practicing on their little private servers hosted in their bedroom or whatever. I want to say that closeness of staff and players in this kind of context is quite a concerning topic, but that will come up in another video one day maybe, if I ever feel the courage to address it. So there was never any real teeth behind the rare and occasional threat that Gravity levelled at private servers. They'd send out cease and desist letters, which would either end up in the server disappearing, but usually they would just go ignored. And it happened like this for 2 decades. Gravity is quite within their right to defend their IP, as well they should. They're a business, and it's easy to write off private servers as being illegal and immoral, but we need to decide and think about why they exist in the first place, and how they're making a monster of Gravity's own making. First of all, Gravity pushed this highly addictive game and knowingly continued to add gambling elements to it, even going as far as to monetize them. A game that is based on behaviour akin to gambling can easily take advantage of this through gacha and loot boxes. It's the same thing, but with a price tag. One day that will be legally recognised, and I hope that a game like Ragnarok, with its child-friendly appearance, gets justice served upon them for peddling gambling to kids. It's despicable. Secondly, they didn't investigate the source of any hackings. As far as we know, if they did, they kept it extremely quiet. Things seem to be swept under the rug, and their security continues to be atrocious to this day. So why do people prefer these servers? Well, the reasons are numerous and mostly understandable. They start off a bit petty in my opinion, but they become increasingly justified through the game's aging process. The first reason was obviously not to pay the subscription fee. Now, that reasoning goes away when it turned free to play, but back in those days the subscription fee was a lot of money for that player base, since they were mostly students. Now obviously not having to pay was a very strong appeal. Some people also knew that the game was in an unfinished state and they wanted more. The emulated private servers offered something officials couldn't, more content, and it was never a secret that Ragnarok was left with tons of unimplemented features when the original dev team left. We should have had housing, we should have had boats, there was a tendency system. You can see the remains of the tendency system in the guild window, just open it up and there it is in the bottom left corner. Also, people taking up the task of coding an entire emulator take it up as a hobby. It's quite engaging and rewarding to do so, and an extremely good learning experience. So I can see why they would get caught up in doing that. So as the game developed, stronger classes were added that changed the dynamic of the whole game and the balance of power, causing people to crave the good old days, preferring to spend their time on servers that didn't have the new classes. And then came the cash shop. The addition of the cash shop changed the game's feel immensely. The focus moved away from hunting items to make cute hats to just hunting Zenny to buy the hats from someone with a credit card, or just using your own credit card to buy said hats. And soon the cash shop became more aggressive, selling enhanced rates of experience drops and increased rates with refining, as well as items that gave stat buffs, and it stopped being the game it was. Also, there is an argument to be made that all items in a cash shop can be sold to players for in-game currency, and this is true, and that actually came about from a meeting myself and some of my friends had at IRO HQ. The problem is, and I really wish I'd foreseen it when I was having this argument with the staff, that you're putting Zenny into the hands of the people who are swiping their credit card. In other words, they're still paying to win. It doesn't change the pay to win mechanic of the game at all. It just makes some things more accessible to players who can't, but at the end of the day, the people with the credit cards retain all the buying power in game. So it stopped being the game that it once was, and the player base found themselves in a strange new world, and a lot of them didn't like it. Soon enough, the subscription fee was entirely scrapped, and even more microtransaction items were being pushed. Loot crates, randomized, justifying the removal of the subscription fee. Now, I believe that Gravity were just attempting to pursue a more modern approach to monetization, if you ask me, and I'm assuming you did because that's why you're watching this video. They should have kept this entirely on the new server that they created. They did make an entirely free-to-play server based on microtransactions. They crippled the game immensely to force more purchases, so people who were familiar with it didn't find it particularly comfortable. That still was a better option than ripping away the world that players had built up over the years. They changed all of the servers to this particular model, and it didn't go down very well. Some players endured through, but the population started to hemorrhage. And the players did vote with their wallets. They stopped playing, Gravity stopped getting the money. But they pressed forward and continued to push more and more aggressive items. I remember one particular conversation with the producer where we were discussing the concern of selling power in the cash shop, some of the items being so strong, and he said, "Players won't buy it unless it's powerful." Real words. So the next big exodus to private servers would have come with the advent of Renewal. Renewal was a large update to the game, changing the way that stats and substats functioned, adding new classes, and making it much more cash shop friendly by shifting the emphasis from stats to equipment. After all, if you sell equipment that requires upgrades to get its extra bonuses, the players will buy the special ores to increase their success chances of those upgrades, as well as the equipment from the cash shop. It's easier and it's much more palatable than selling stats directly. And something about backend management being easier. It's not important anyway. There was no official way to play the old style game anymore except through emulators, so naturally many players sought out servers that provided that. Eventually, after some player pressure, Gravity did provide one classic server on IRO, the international server, which that particular classic server proved to have a longer lifespan than any pre-renewal server before it, and it was still very cash shop heavy, but it stood as a testament to how much people loved that style of the game. Classic opened in June 2012 and it closed in June 2019. Now, I want to put this in perspective. Renewal was released in 2008, meaning that the original service had 5 years of beta, or 5 years after beta of pre-renewal, and yet the Classic server lasted a whole 7 years. It started at a much later episode. It never had the beta period. Another thing, no two servers were ever on the same update. Some find themselves years behind others. This kind of disparity between the servers, and it literally being illegal to access Korean RO unless you have a Korean social security number, drove people to run servers where those with access to KRO emulated what they saw there and put them years ahead of the official international versions of the game. The biggest blow was to the EU The biggest blow was to the population was when the EU ban happened. This happened in May 2018 with a mere 1 month advance notice. All accounts registered from Europe were to be perma-banned and European IPs blocked from accessing servers. No character transfers, everything is just gone. Oh, and you're booted from the community too. They blame GDPR, but I have huge doubts over that since European Services license changed hands not too long after. GDPR came into force 2 years after it became law, so they had plenty of time to prepare. Although there was a European server, many EU players preferred the international one, as the European server actually came later and they were already established on IRO. A transfer was offered, but not to everyone, and many of them still had friends, so they chose to stay. For example, I couldn't go because the transfer wasn't offered to players from the UK. Or, maybe they stayed because they wanted to play Classic, or maybe they wanted to play RO2, which was also not available in Europe. There was also the small matter of the European server being severely behind in updates. IRO had a huge European population that had been there for a very long time. Like myself, for example, I was there for 16 years. 16 years is a long time to build friends and community ties. Naturally, when the Europeans had to leave, many of their international friends followed regardless of where they were from, and this started a cycle of IRO opening and closing servers. Since the EU ban, IRO has closed 3 servers, including Classic, which limped along on life support for a whole year after the European ban, before finally succumbing to low population. I mean, I guess there were like some random scandals and stuff along the way that made people leave, but let's not dwell on that right now. Along this whole journey, Gravity had so many chances to keep those players and change their ways. They could have updated their security, they could have thought over the microtransaction model, they could have catered to Classic players worldwide. Why only one Classic server if you're insisting on regions? I'm not saying that piracy is the right thing to do, because I'm sure you streamed the movie the other day. Go buy a copy. Go support the original creator. You wouldn't download a car, would you? But what I am saying is that Gravity brought this situation upon themselves, and with some care and some interaction, those private server communities, they could have made adjustments or made a side product to retain them as players. But as it stands, and I'm pretty good at making up random numbers, so I'm going to say about 80% of private server players are not lost customers for Gravity, just because of the criteria that I've laid up above. People who left because of trans class, they're not coming back. 3rd and 4th classes exist now. They didn't like trans. They'll hate 3rd class. And people who left because of renewal, the same energy, no official Classic server. And people who left because of cash shop, well, Gravity are just going to have to get that message that they've been ignoring for the last... how many years has it been? 12? 13? A long time. As for Europeans have been dealing with a cycle of server closures and openings with lost progress every time, even before the EU ban. The EU server was notorious for changing hands repeatedly and then losing their progress. So when they were shuffled to European RO, if they wanted a legal version to play, by the way, nobody from Europe was allowed to access that service, so even if I wanted to take my guild with me to the European server where I was allowed to play, they weren't allowed to follow me. The European server that existed at the time of the European ban closed down shortly after the EU players were ejected from IRO. A new company took up the service, so I'm assuming that the license changed hands in that time. It may or may not have contributed to the fact that the EU players were booted out. I'm sure that a region exclusive license commands a higher price. The new company opened up a server with a really early episode of renewal, but still renewal. Why would anyone want to go backwards from where they came from, knowing that they wouldn't be at the point they were on IRO for years? Well, that server flopped, and then they had to open yet another one. And that's kind of the life of playing Ragnarok in Europe. So here we are, 4 years after the ban, 20 years after going pay to play, and Gravity have just decided to go berserk defending themselves against the private server world. For a company that barely advertises, they've got a real strange hate boner against people making content of their game, even if they don't say where those people are playing. And what I do know is that firsthand, a lot of people asked me, what is that game, when I was playing on private servers, and those people proceeded to go look up the game and join it for themselves. They would find their way to privates anyway if they didn't like the officials or the microtransaction type business. Many did go to officials though, and I'm sure this is the same for many other streamers of the game. The new policy against piracy has been sudden and aggressive. Twitch streamers are getting all of their VOD struck at once, so they lose their channel instantly, and potentially their income too. And they're not being particularly careful about it. I got a DMCA strike on Twitch for streaming old play from a classic, on IRO of all things, official play. Luckily it wasn't my main Twitch account because I was kind of expecting it because their incompetence is legendary. But still, I've been contesting it with them as I could see a lot of streamers hurt by this mistake. It's been a week, we've had 2 replies, and both times they've told me to take it up with Twitch, whereas Twitch say to take it up with the copyright holder. So they really just don't want to engage. And I've heard rumours now that the staff of Gravity are literally interviewing streamers in their chat and making them prove which server they're on, which is a bit weird, but okay. If you don't know what your IP looks like, maybe you shouldn't be policing it like that? Just a thought. So as for the copyright takedowns against private servers themselves, instead of cease and desists now, it seems they've gone straight into lawsuits. There's one open in California requesting a jury trial against one particular private server. And Gravity have announced on all their region websites that they're taking legal action against 7 servers in North America alone, with more worldwide. By the way, this same statement talks about private servers not being safe and secure. Says the company that requires Flash for registration in 2022 and refuses to comply with data protection laws in Europe and prefers to ban the whole continent instead. Alright, something doesn't add up there. Okay. Obviously, the private server issue is an issue for them, of course. They need to defend their IP. Can they blame private servers for a loss of revenue? Maybe a tiny bit, but not really. It's a great excuse that they can throw around towards people who aren't engaged with the Ragnarok community and games and don't know better. But really, think about what their excuse is here. Private servers offer content that we don't have, such as a depreciated version of the game that we refuse to provide, or cash shop free play, are costing us users on our cash shop based renewal servers that these people refuse to play. Yeah, that doesn't make much sense to me. So if there is to be any future for the PC version of the game, Gravity needs to stop being so pig-headed and work with these communities on a legal solution for these players. It would keep them engaged with their IP, and that's what they need. Many of the developers in a private server world would be happy to reach out. Some of them have even asked to buy a license, and they're just meeting silence. They're turning people who may have wanted to support them against them even more with these extreme hostile actions. Why don't they warn the streamers before getting their channels permabanned? Why don't you just ask them to stop streaming illegal servers before striking random old VODs to take them out in one swoop without warning? Why not go heavy on the cease and desist letters before following up with legal action? At least this way it would be palatable to move to officials. It's a very fast and decisive move, which is simply poisoning people against them when they should be winning hearts and souls to come play their games. They're not Nintendo, they can't afford to do this. Since it is so rapid and brutal, I can only speculate on why they're doing this, and frankly, I don't have any good scenarios in my head. Maybe they're selling the IP off or something and they have to clean up their act, but that's all I can speculate. I suppose if Gravity don't want to make something amazing with the dedicated fans out there, all we can do is wait for the PC version to die off completely, as they keep doing despicable things and not gaining their players back. In the meantime, I'm sure they're coming up with some awful cash grab project for the 20th anniversary in June. If it seems good initially, it'll probably change later. Just another bait and switch capitalising on nostalgia like all their recent servers. As a general rule, they like to throw the Riot Classic around to bait in old players who like the old mechanics, when really they're just offering a modern mechanics server with the playable content stripped away, often with an aggressive cash shop attached to it. The last one I played sold HP potions in the cash shop, which you could access anywhere in game since it was a client button. Classic era players might check it out, but I'm pretty sure they'll also quickly leave. Personally, I'm not even going to give them numbers and figures to look good on their reports. I'll just pass. I might do a quick whip around and fundraise and send them a cake or something, because despite all of their madness right now, those 16 years were an important time in my life and they facilitated that. I love all the people I've met and I have a great online family. I've flown out to meet them, and I can honestly say that playing RO has been a life-changing experience for me, for the better. I spent so long trying to make sure that other people could just have as good of an experience as I did. I threw myself into helping where I could, engaging with the staff and working on fan sites, making events, assisting players, making content, advertising the game, or being a go-between for the players and staff, suggesting improvements, or being a sounding board for the staff's plans. I've always tried to make Ragnarok Online be the best game it can possibly be while I played there. And despite everything, where I am right now, in my heart, I still want to do that, but I can't play officials, and it hurts. So, Gravity, if you're listening, please, get it together. You have a wonderful fan base out here that can make wonderful things. And with that, I am out. Thank you for listening.